give me a one of you start and tell me.
You're the old man.
Name's Michael Burke. I started working at Empire Music in, I believe, the summer of 1965, when I was right after junior year of high school.
So my name's Gene Aker, and when I came back from Vietnam in 1968, I was looking for a job, and Jim Seward put me to work for the Christmas rush of 1968, and that's when I met Michael. And over the course of the next few years, Jim opened up more stores. Jim Seward, the owner of Empire Music, and he opened up a store in Georgetown and shifted Mike down there as the store manager. And then he opened a store in Silver Spring and shifted another one of the guys, Bud Wise, to that store as a manager. And then he opened a store in Gaithersburg, and I can't remember who managed the Gaithersburg store.
Junior.
Junior?
Junior for a while. There was one of the characters that worked at Empire was Billie Jean Smith, Junior. We called him Junior, and he was a bit of a savant.
That's for sure.
You could name any song on a 45 record from about 1953 on, and he'd tell you who wrote it, how long it was, what the flip side was, what color the label was, who played on it. But a total train wreck aside from that.
So Junior managed the Gaithersburg store, and I eventually became the manager of the Bethesda store, and then I became general manager. And whenever somebody was sick or anything, I'd be the one to go to the other store and fill in to help out whatever needed to be done. And that was the pecking order for about 3 years or so. I left in '72 to go back to school. But I stayed in touch with Jim and Mike, obviously, over all these years. We lost Jim in '76 to an unfortunate accident.
Mm-hmm. Jim was probably one of the most unique personalities I've ever met. He was like I guess you'd call him a beatnik. Back then, he was he did drugs. He hung around with the gay crowd that hung around at North Beach. He had served some time in prison. Because he had, when they caught him, he went away for grand theft auto, and like 40-some counts, but he only stole Oldsmobile Rocket 88s. That was the only car that was good enough for him to steal, so that was the only one, and he'd just steal them and joyride in them. But his major undoing was he'd gotten thrown out of BCC High School in, I guess it was 56 or 57, for wearing blue jeans, because you were not allowed to wear blue jeans to school back then. And the assistant principal suspended him or whatever. So Jim built a bomb to blow up the assistant principal and his house. And he got caught when he took it to, I believe the place was called Abercrombie's Silver Plating in Silver Spring, and he wanted to have it. He wanted the very best bomb there could be, and he didn't have the money to have it gold plated, so he took it in and asked them if they would plate it in silver, and they immediately called the police, and Jim went away. But Jim was
unique.
A couple of he had a side business of providing jukeboxes and vending machines, pinball machines, etc., to youth centers and teen club type places. And every jukebox Jim ever sent out would have Louie Louie. Right next to Louie Louie, we would have the Hallelujah Chorus by the Mormon Tabernacle Choir. And they had to be side by side. It was just the way he did things.
Now I saw the newspaper article about him, being the Bethesda bomber, or rather being in trouble for the bomb incident.
Really?
Yeah, it was in the Washington Post when it was just in the early 50s or mid 50s.
Could you send me that? Or
sure.
Send me a link to it?
Yeah, of course.
I'd like to read that.
Yeah.
Well, that part of his history came in handy about 1970 or 71, there was a local free paper called the Washington Free Press. And there was a judge in Montgomery County called Pugh, P-U-G-H, and he had fallen in disfavor with the young generation, with the hippies and everybody, for some of his rulings. And he was portrayed in a political cartoon masturbating behind the bench. And that cartoon was ruled to be obscene by another judge in Montgomery County, go figure. And they ordered all the copies to be seized. The judge ruled that all copies of the Washington Free Press with that cartoon in it were to be seized, and whoever had them in their possession was to be arrested. And of course, Empire Music had them on the counter. And there came a time when the Montgomery County Police came in from Bethesda, came into the store, and they went back and asked for Mr. Seward. First of all, they were extremely polite because they I don't know how they didn't know how to deal with Jim because of his reputation, and told him the paper had to be seized. And Jim said, "Take it." And they took the papers and they left. They didn't arrest anybody. I mean, they just didn't want to mess with Jim. They didn't want to piss him off.
I remember that. You told me that story, I think, on, so.
That's one of my favorite things with Jim, his reputation. And I was unaware of his past. And I asked Mike or one of the guys about it, and they told me what it was. And I said, oh, I understand now. And I remember some of our sources of records were a little bit nefarious.
Oh yeah, there were, toward the end of my tenure there, Jim started buying records from these two gentlemen. He called them the Joy Boys. They were professional heroin addicts. And, I mean, they would leave their houses every day, suit and tie, like they were going to work, keep up the appearances for the neighbors, and they'd spend the whole day boosting records out of drug fair and Woolworths, bringing them to Empire. And we had a whole operation in the back room where we hired the kids from junior high and high school to split the cellophanes, make sure the stickers that said Woolworths or drug fair went
neatly removed.
Went in one trash can that got burned, and then he had a shrink wrap machine to re-shrink them.
Right.
And he would pay them $1 an album. And
we put them back on the shelves and sell them.
That's right. One of the first things I remember, the first Christmas season at the store in Bethesda, he would, December in the record business is kind of like Valentine's Day for candy or jewelers.
Yep.
You do 90% of your business in 3 or 4 weeks. He would have us meet at Hot Shops in Bethesda at about 8:30 in the morning and buy us breakfast and give each one of us a hit of speed and a down. So we'd be very cheerful, very happy, very quick, but very mellow. But we'd open the store at 9:30, and if there wasn't a whole lot of walk-in traffic right then, there was a Woolworths right next door. And Jim would gather 2 or 3 of us and say, okay, we're going to go learn how to shoplift. Because if you know how to shoplift, you can prevent shoplifting. So we'd go next door and steal this many LPs and bring them over and take the labels off and resell them.
Process them.
Yes. He was different like that. I hadn't thought about that in years.
I remember one Christmas when I was working by myself at the front counter, and one of the Joy Boys came in with 2 boxes of records. And I said, "What you got there?" And he told me, and I paid him, and he left. When I went to check the boxes, they were empty.
They did that a lot.
And I said, "Jim, I just got taken advantage of." And I told him what happened. He laughed, says, "Don't worry about it." And I said, "I'll get them later." And that was the end of it.
They just on purpose, or they were just?
Oh yeah,
they needed to get their fix, and they needed the money, and they weren't working, so they just brought some empty boxes in. And I was too busy. I had a line of people at the register, and I was by myself. I didn't even bother to check. That never happened again. I'll say that right now. But they got me once. 2 boxes of records, and they were empty boxes.